Welcome, fellow confidence crusaders, neuro nerds, and success equalizers. This is your podcast, Real Confidence. I'm your host, Alyssa DeVere, and I'll be sharing a bit of basic brain science, some surprising social secrets, and a touch of tough love. Why? Because I believe confidence is everyone's fundamental right and choice. So let's get to it. Welcome all, particularly if any of you are out there that are current writers or wannabe writers. I got a treat for you. I got Erin Lebacqz in the house. She has been teaching writing in businesses and schools in the US and Asia for over 25 years. And she is the author of a book that is going to be so interesting to learn today. It's called High Value Writing, Real Strategies for Real World Writing. And it's a book based on her classroom experience. And amen, sister, I at least said it right. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Well, thanks so much, Alyssa. Hi, everybody, and thanks for having me.
So I'm going to trip on this at least once, so I apologize to you and the audience. Real world writing. What is that?
Right? I know we don't hear it phrased that way too often, do we? But I think the reason I talk about writing in that way is because I came out of teaching in colleges and universities, and most of my career was teaching college writing or academic writing. And then when I switched to teaching in the workplace, I noticed, whoa, big disconnect between what we learn in school and what we need to do at work. And so my students would ask, oh, this is so cool. We're learning how to be clear and concise. It's different than what I did in school. How can I practice? And I said, well, there aren't really that many ways of practicing because most of the books on writing are for students. So I thought, well, I'll write one. I'll kind of put together what we talk about in class, which is how to show up as your real self, how to connect with an actual human being on the other side, and how to use intentional, strategies to ensure mutual understanding, connection, empathy, relationship building, as well as, just following the rules and whatnot.
That's a lot to think about, let alone say, right? I so many people, I think, are sitting there going, I can barely follow the rules of grammar. You're asking me to do all these other things, but I think at the core of it is this insecurity about writing. And I wonder, in your experience, what do you think is the cause?
Yeah, that's a great insight. It's very much, people are very insecure about writing. We're all nervous about our writing because we all feel, for one thing, like we could be judged through our writing. And so it's scary putting yourself out there for sure. And then I think if we layer onto that the way we truly have been judged for our writing in our childhood and as we got older and as a young adult. And so because of the fact that we talked about writing possibly every day for months at a time in school, we only talked about it that one way, where our task as a writer in school was to turn something in, to show what you know, and get judged. And so that's kind of how we remember writing. Oh, it's about showing what I know so that I can prove that I'm worthy. Someone will judge me. So sorry. But then when we get out of school and we're writing in the real world, we don't have another mind frame, another framework to think about it. We're still kind of thinking, ooh, I'm going to get judged. It's all about correctness. Let me write in a really long manner that sounds like school, so I sound sophisticated. And then we realize, well, people in the real world don't really want to read that kind of writing. We don't want to read academic writing. We want to read more targeted writing. But it becomes difficult for people to, I think, take that leap and build that confidence in writing in what we need at work, because they've spent so long being told how to do it at school. And we often haven't talked about writing since school. So there's no way to really change our mind frame about it.
Very true. Now, something happened literally yesterday, and knowing we were going to talk today, I was so excited because there was an email exchange with a client that I've been working with. And I could definitely tell in her change in tone in the last few weeks. I mean, granted, I'm a confidence chick, so I'm always looking for stuff like this. There was something going on. And she was very aggressive in her emails, very, very terse. And so I kind of called her on it. I was like, what's going on? Is there something that I did or said that I can be aware and correct, or are, but clearly there's something. And of course she came back, she's like, no, you're reading into my emails. And so funny enough, I was like, yeah, I am. And that judgment that you just mentioned, I think we do that maybe differently than our teachers did, but we are always looking for maybe, I think we're always looking for cues. What's going on with that person? What's their intention? Are they trying to, right? I don't know. Or is that just me, Erin? Do you think people actually read into those kinds of things in business communication?
I sure do. I think your example is spot on. I think most of us go through something like that each week, right? Where we think, oh, is this person mad at me? Or, oh, is this person not interested in what I'm saying? And so that's what we have to keep in mind as writers, is that you're right. We're being kind of seen through our writing. Now our writing represents us as a human being, especially in today's remote world. And when we're not sure, when there's a disconnect, doing exactly what you did is perfect. Just asking, hey, I don't want to be interpreting wrong. Is there something going on? But that tone aspect of our writing now kind of represents what we're like to people. And so that's something that the book takes on, is kind of like, well, if that's the case, how can we choose our words carefully in a way that's fairly easy, but that makes sure that we remember writing is not just informational, it's relational. And so as you developed thoughts about that person based on their writing, that's what we're all doing. I mean, you and I emailed each other before we ever met. And then when we got here, I felt comfortable because all of your emails had built my trust. That's what writing does. It's a relationship builder.
Yeah.
As well, like in
Interesting.
your experience.
Really interesting. So when we're talking about these emails that may trigger us to have that little insecurity moment ourselves, but we're seeing on the page, electronic or otherwise, that there's some sign, there's something that's going on with the writer that is either saying they're not in a confident place, they're angry, they're frustrated, whatever it might be. What are there some telltale signs? I have my own opinion, but I like the experts. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really great question, where we can look at someone's writing and decide, we can sometimes even think, ooh, what's their personality like, right? But we can think, what's their confidence in writing like? I would say by, do they use language like long lead-ins that puts off their meaning as if they're not sure? Like, it has come to our attention that we are in need of contacting you, relating to, and it goes on and on and on before we get to the real point. And then maybe we could say, instead of I'm writing to explain that your profile needs to be updated, we could just say, please update your profile. And I think the second version gets to that action sooner. We hear a verb real soon. That tends to sound more confident. I'm ready to do some action. Here's my verb. But the prior example, I'm writing to, it has come to our attention that, those sort of what I call slow lead-ins, they delay meaning. And I think that makes the writer sound like they're not quite as sure of their meaning or how to express it.
Yeah. In our courses, we teach a lot about communication, including a little bit of writing, just a smidgen, but verbal or writing, we talk about those lead-ins. And I remember when I was writing my very first book, now I'm on my 8th book, so this was a long time ago. And my publisher, who was an older gentleman, was scolding me, saying, stop using phrases like I think, you should, it might be, right? All those kind of fluffy intros that not only kind of delayed the meaning, like you said, but clearly were saying, I'm not the expert. And that changed my world. And when I read people who do that now, it is such a screamer to me. So, that's a really good example. Are there any other things that you notice in people's writing that kind of flags you as going, oh, they're writing in an insecure spot?
Yeah, I think when people are insecure about their writing, and I think we could all, at least me, be guilty of this, our brains have been picking up information all day long, right? And one of the things our brains have picked up over time is that good writing supposedly sounds fancy, big vocab, bureaucratic sounding, and doesn't really sound like an authentic person. But that's a myth, right? But it gets into our heads that we should sound bureaucratic and use a fancy vocab and not really represent as ourselves, but as this sort of robot of how we think official writing sounds. I think that can make someone sound less confident when they're not writing as themselves, but they're more, and we don't do it for any negative reason. We're just trying to do a good job, but we try to write in a way that sounds bureaucratic and fancy, and it ends up sounding overly formal, stilted, often fluffy, and not concise, which I think is just another flag. If there's anywhere, like, I am interested in learning your opinion about, we could just say, please tell me. Any of those sort of hedging and putting off. And then to your point too, like you said, when we say, I think, blah, 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 let's just say, let's blah, blah, blah. And we could really take that even a little more deeply, possibly through a gender lens, where what I've seen in classes, of course, is that women have been more conditioned to write in a way that sounds less sure, just as we've been conditioned to act less sure. But we don't need to do that, right? We can take these insights and think, well, I'm going to get my verb out there sooner. I'm going to sound like I have action I want to take.
You bring up something that's close to my heart, which is not just the gender difference, but maybe, even diversity angles of things that people show up visually, physically, condensed over in their shoulder language and so forth. So do you see any other differences in confidence in writing amongst ages or gendered, not just genders, but races or any other kind of diversity lines?
Yeah, I think whoever has been stereotyped as less, quote, successful in academics has possibly been raised to feel like they're not good at writing. So it's like stereotype threat in general. Any of us who are in groups that there's myths and stereotypes that we're not as good at something, it gets into our heads a little bit. And so people who've either been raised where they don't feel like their education was as good as other people's, or they didn't have books at home, or they didn't go to a fancy college, which actually is not needed at all to write clearly at work. But we can get it into our heads that we're not good enough. And that's simply not true, because there is no one correct way to write. There's only a way that's right for each situation. So there's no possibility that some of us are doing it right and everyone else is wrong, because it's always circumstantial. But I think people who've been sort of marginalized by academic and financial communities could also think, well, maybe I'm not that good at this skill. But what I see in the classroom is quite the opposite. The people who are accustomed to speaking in a real world setting are able to be clear and have their focus on what the reader wants more than what they themselves, the writer, want. And that's really the key to strong writing. So it doesn't matter where your degree is from or if you have a degree at all. It's about your mindset, your ability to logic it out, your ability to empathize with your reader.
I love that you said that, because when I teach pitch, which is a form of communication, of course, often it is the people who are not native English speakers that are better, because they're not filling all those gaps with waste words. So I really do appreciate what you said. And thank you for letting people know that you're not being judged because you don't know some big fancy words. In fact, sometimes when I get those big fancy words from people, I'm like, okay, knock it off. I have a vocabulary, like nobody's business, but you're just showing off, right?
Kind of a turn off. Yeah. When people show up in that way, it feels a little inauthentic.
All right. So here's what I'd like to do. We're going to take a very quick sponsor break, but when we come back, we've been talking about some of the signs and issues about not writing confidently. So obviously I want you to tell us not just how to write more confidently, but how to get somebody who feels like they don't have they don't have confidence as a writer. How do we get over that hump? So we're going to be back in just a few. This podcast was sponsored by the American Confidence Institute. ACI trains smart, hardworking people how to use basic brain science to more effectively coach themselves and others. ACI is endorsed by top universities, the Strategic HR Management Association, and International Coaching Federation. Learn more about ACI's uniquely empowering keynotes, workshops, e-classes, and coaching certification at www.americanconfidenceinstitute.com. This is right up my alley, this podcast, because as now I guess I can call myself a writer, but even after like 3 or 4 books and articles in some of the top pubs, people would call me a writer and I'd be like, I'm not a writer.
Yeah.
So Erin, I got to ask, we're going to break this into 2 parts. One is like, what about those people? And I'd be a very, very wealthy woman if I had $1 every time somebody came up to me and said, that they want to write a book and they couldn't, I'd love to write a book, but they could never do it. And I'm like, why not? Like, the only reason I wrote a book is nobody told me I couldn't, right? So let's start on how to be more confident as a writer. And then we'll talk about specific things in our writing that will come across as more confidently. So somebody who is like, I could never write, I'm not a confident writer, I can't do it. What are your best tips, words of wisdom?
Yeah, great. So yeah, we'll start with some kind of internal ways that we can think, right? It's just like when we try to do self-development and growth in other ways, we look a lot at our mindset. When people go through a therapy program or something, we're often looking at our mindset, right? So a lot of writing confidence has to do with, I think, two aspects of our mindsets. One that we need to get rid of and one that we need to develop or cultivate. The one that we want to try to leave behind is that most of us have a lot of myths about good writing rattling around in our heads. We think that good writing means the same thing as academic writing, or it means the same thing as writing that famous people do and inventors and novelists. We don't realize that writing is actually for everybody. And like we talked about earlier, we associate that school judgment with it. So I would just encourage us to kind of notice, okay, well, when I grew up, it was presented to me that to do a good job, I had to write this long thing with a lot of big words and get points on it. I found it scary. I hated doing it. So I must not be good at writing. Well, but that incident has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that maybe now someone wants to rent an apartment and they've got to email the landlord. That is a completely different type of writing. So whether someone wants to write a book or just be effective in their daily writing or even get a promotion at work, there's no possible way that you can't write, because writing is actually about logic. It's not about the things that we got red penned on in the past. So our first thing we need to do is try our best to just lose those myths. Any beliefs about yourself that you developed in school are probably not applicable at this point. And so what we can do instead is cultivate the mindset of our own expertise. And any of us are actually the expert in a writing situation. And we'll talk in a little bit about, what this might look like strategy-wise. But if you're writing for work, most of the people that I talk to write all day long. They email people, they try to look good to their boss and everything. And they tell me, Erin, I'm so scared when I write to my boss. And I say, well, but the truth is, who knows more than you about what you are writing right now? You know your boss, you know what you're trying to do. That's all we ever need. Who's my reader and what is my goal? If you know those two things, you can answer any writing question you might have, because the length of your writing, the tone, the level of vocabulary, those can all be decided by your own analysis of who's going to read it and what is it you're trying to accomplish. So there's no way that you don't know, because if you're the one who has to write the email, you truly know more about the situation than anyone else. And since there's no right way to write, it's always situational. You're the expert in that situation. So we often talk about how to start understanding our readers and getting to that point of, again, it's not what gave us a good grade in school, so let those myths go. It's understanding another person at this point. And if I write my email in this way, it's going to sound condescending, or it's going to sound aggressive, or it's going to sound helpful. And we can all make those choices by just analyzing the situations that we're in and trying our best to kind of free ourselves of any self-beliefs that were negative about writing.
I'm wondering, as we start to bridge into the conversation about things we can do in our writing, how do you feel about all these tools now that are judging whether our writing is friendly or condescending or otherwise? Do you think they are useful, and should we rely on them? Or, your point about really knowing your reader and your intent before you put anything on the page, I think is really the key, right?
I do. Yeah. I think that those tools can be helpful, but I wouldn't want to treat them as gospel, because if I'm writing to you, for example, Alyssa, and then the AI gives me a suggestion like, ooh, this phrase would sound really friendly, but what if it's a little formal? And now we've had a nice chat and I would feel kind of rude being overly formal with you. And so I would want to check against my own understanding, again, of the situation. Any writer knows more about the situation than AI knows. So the AI can give you some great suggestions, but you're really the expert on whether that's a good example to take and use.
All right, so let's really hit hard now on things that we can do. And you brought up a lot of um, in and around this authenticity and being, true to your reader, true to yourself. And so some rules, some ways that we can be confident, at the same time being appropriate, because dropping an F-bomb in an email, probably not the best idea, but what can we do to really kind of be confident, authentic, true, and subsequently effective communicators?
Right. Yeah. And a colleague of mine, when I taught university, did receive an email from a student with an F-bomb in it, explaining why they were late for class because their car was F-bombed up. And I have to say, it created kind of a new opinion of that student for her. So you're right. We want to be authentic, but we want to be authentic in a way that's also applicable to the situation, and to the relationship we have with that person. Again, back to, I wouldn't want to be overly formal with you, Alyssa, at this point because we've already met and that could sound a little cold. He shouldn't have done that with his teacher, right? So yes, we want to sound like a human, but we also want to, filter it through what's right for the situation. And so I think a lot of what we want to do to sound like ourselves is to get our true point and our true ask out there a little more easily. Again, without those slow lead-ins. On a sentence level, I always encourage people to take any old ugly sentence that you've written, look in your sentence, figure out who's doing something, and put them in the front. So we could say, like, it was decided in the leadership committee meeting that 5 new courses will be added to the catalog. Well, who did it? I don't know. Who in the meeting decided it? I can't tell from the sentence. We want to say who did something in the beginning because that sounds confident and it sounds like you're giving real information. And it even sounds like a person because it's a little more akin to how we talk. Because we do say who and what earlier. So we might be like, leadership decided to add new courses. We can enroll in new courses. And so I always tell students, start with your who and what. If you like grammar, that's your subject and your verb. But it doesn't matter if someone's a grammar person or not. We can all figure out, well, who do I want to be taking action in my sentence? Pick that person or group of people out and put them in the front. And it does sound more confident because you've gotten right to your point. You've talked about real people and you've written in a way that's more relevant, more related to how we speak. So that's the main thing, is to get that out early. And then in terms of maybe a holistic piece, or maybe you have an email of a few paragraphs or a document, not burying the lead, getting right to the point quickly and getting the call to action out there clearly and concisely. If you do have to ask your reader to do something, use a strong command verb like submit, edit, join, or something like that. And if you feel rude, put a please in the front. Please submit your edits by Thursday. Please provide me with any extra thoughts by Thursday. Please let me know by Thursday. It still sounds nice, but it's confident because it's got that command verb up there sooner. So who and what in the beginning, a real call to action. Don't be afraid to ask other people to do things. If you ever feel rude asking someone to do something, you know what would be ruder? Leaving them not knowing what to do. So it's okay to be clear about your own ask as well.
I love that. I love that. Yes. By not telling somebody what you want, right? It's very fundamental to what we teach at ACI, is this whole notion of, if you don't tell people what your values are, what's important to you,
right.
How the heck are they going to respect it? So I love that. Erin, I don't say this to everyone because I tend to write more books than I read, but I'm dying to read yours, the cover to cover. I know other people here are going to be as well. How do they find you? How do they find the book? And if they want to reach you, tell them how to do that.
Yeah, I'd love to chat with folks. The book is on Amazon and it's, Barnes and Noble, the big sellers in general. It's short. It includes examples of actual sentences. So it's not just theory. So yeah, check that out if you like, folks. And then another type of free learning that I offer is my YouTube channel, which is just called High Value Writing. And it's got videos, images, surveys, all kinds of stuff for you to go through and just fix up whatever area of writing you wanted to work on, including confidence. And you can always find me through my website too at highvaluewriting.com.
Thank you so much for sharing these incredibly valuable tips. And for all those of you out there, keep writing, start writing, and do it with confidence. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alyssa. Thanks, everybody.
Before we totally wrap up, I want to let you know that full transcripts and show notes for this and other Real Confidence episodes can be found on www.americanconfidenceinstitute.com/podcast. I also want to remind you once again that the best way to get confidence is to give it to others, and you can do it just by liking and sharing this episode on your preferred podcast and social media channels. You can even give me some confidence by noting topics you'd like me to consider for the future. So for now, this is Alyssa DeVere. Thank you for helping to bring more confidence to the world. Master editing done by Ben Weinstein with original music performed and composed by Jeff Mitchell. Real Confidence is a production of American Confidence Institute. All rights reserved.